Good morning, good afternoon for wherever you're joining us from. My name is Jess Pomfret. My pronouns are she and her. I'm currently a database engineer and an open source contributor. I contribute to the Dba Tools, and dbhx modules, and I've also written a couple of resources for the SQL Server DSC module. I'm passionate about SQL Server, PowerShell, and proper football. I currently live in the south of England, which is where I'm originally from, but spent 15 years in the United States, so there's some arguments on what proper football is. My contact details are on the slides. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I spend a lot of my time on Twitter, probably more time than I should. I'm also really excited that I get to put my little MVP sticker down in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide now. I was recently awarded MVP in February, which means I enjoy talking about SQL Server and PowerShell and contributing to the community. For today's session, I'm going to show you my Life Hacks Dba Tools edition. We'll talk about what Dba Tools is. I'll show you how to get started with Dba Tools, and then I'm going to show you 3 life hacks that you can take back to your organization and use to make a difference right away. So what is Dba Tools? Dba Tools is an open source PowerShell module. It's basically a command line management studio. The power of using Dba Tools over Management Studio is that it's great for handling multiples. So with Management Studio, you can easily control one server, one database, one login through the GUI. With Dba Tools, you can handle multiples at once. So you could handle multiple databases, you could handle multiple logins, you could apply settings to multiple servers at once. Dba Tools also handles all of the ways to log into SQL Server that Management Studio does, including multi-factor authentication. It also supports SQL Server 2000 and PowerShell 3 wherever possible. One of the goals for Dba Tools is to help you with migrations away from that older tech, so backwards compatibility is really important. Dba Tools is MIT licensed, which is a short and simple license. It basically means as long as you keep the copyright and license notices intact, you can use it for whatever you need. You can use it for private use or commercial use. You can also modify and distribute the module. Dba Tools is also secure. The PowerShell team worked really hard at making PowerShell secure by design, and then Dba Tools layers additional security on top of that. The module is code signed, which means what you download from the PowerShell gallery, if the cert is intact on that module, it is exactly what the Dba Tools team uploaded. So you know that that code is in the state that they put it there. It hasn't been tampered with. There are a lot of pester tests within the Dba Tools module, which keeps the functionality working as expected. As people are contributing and making changes, the pester tests ensure that the current functionality isn't broken. Dba Tools is hosted on GitHub. The team have branch policies in place to make sure that code that is merged into the module goes through several checks from key team members, passes pester tests, and doesn't break anything before a new version is released. So a quick history about Dba Tools. It was created by Chrissy Lemaire back in 2014. Chrissy had to do a SharePoint migration, and if you know anything about SharePoint, it creates a lot of objects in SQL Server. There are databases, several databases, logins, jobs, link servers, all under the covers of SharePoint on SQL Server. So she wrote one PowerShell script that basically moved all of the things she needed from one server to another. In September 2015, she put it on GitHub. She was convinced by people in the community that actually that was a really handy module to have and a lot of people could use it. So she put it on GitHub, and that's when Dba Tools really started to become a module. It then took almost 4 years to June 2019 for the 1.0 launch. The reason it took so long is because there ended up being so many commands. There was 550 PowerShell commands in the 1.0 release. And Chrissy made sure that all of the people contributing to the module followed some standard naming conventions so that the parameters that you use for the functions all kind of start to feel the same. She also wanted to ensure that all of the functions had command-based help. So if you need to use one of the Dba Tools functions, you can use get help and see what's available. There are also 590 pester tests within the module. That was really important so that we made sure it was secure and we ensured the functionality stayed the same. If you're interested in getting a book on Dba Tools, Chrissy and Rob are currently working on Learn Dba Tools in a month of lunches. It's available as early access from Manning right now, and you can download that. 7 of the 26 chapters can now be read. So that's my quick introduction to Dba Tools. I'm going to dive into VS Code and my demos to show you how to get started and to show you my 3 life hacks. Getting started with Dba Tools. I'm going to show you how to get the module, get it installed on your workspace and ready to go. We'll look through some of the commands that are available. I'll show you how to use the command-based help, and then we'll talk a little bit about splatting. So first up, we need to get the module. The module is available on the PowerShell gallery, as I mentioned, and if you're connected to the internet and running an appropriate PowerShell version, you can use install module Dba Tools to install that module from the gallery. You can also, if you're not connected to the internet, or if you're connected to the internet but need to use the module on a computer that isn't, you can use save module and put it into a path, and that will save the module to my ctemp folder that I can then move to the server that I need to use it on. If I've installed the module from the gallery, I can use update module Dba Tools to keep up to date with the latest version. The Dba Tools team are putting out new versions every few days. So using update module, you can stay up to date. Once I've downloaded the module and I have it available on my machine, I can use import module Dba Tools to import the module into my PowerShell session. I can use get module Dba Tools to check the version that I have available. And you can see here I have version 1.0.102. This is the module that's actively imported into my session. I can also add the list available parameter to see any other versions that I have available on my machine. You can see here that I have a few versions available. For Dba Tools, or for any PowerShell module, you can use get command to find out what commands are available within the module. If I run this, you can see that there are hundreds of commands available within Dba Tools. You can also then pass in a pattern. So get command for the wildcard compression from the module Dba Tool, and you can see that I have get Dba compression, set Dba compression, and test Dba compression available. Get command is part of PowerShell, so you can use that against any module. Dba Tools has also introduced this find Dba command, and I can run that with the same pattern for compression. You can see that I get more commands returned. The reason is that find Dba command searches all of the command-based help for the keyword compression. So for example, backup Dba database is returned, and that's because there is a compression parameter on backup Dba database that allows you to apply backup compression when taking a backup. There are some other parameters on the find Dba command, including author Pomfret. So these are the commands that I have helped to start. The reason I'm showing you this is that I had, for example, I had an idea that I needed to back up and restore database certificates. So I wrote backup Dba DB certificate and restore Dba DB certificate for the specific use case I had. And then other people have come along and added onto those with use cases they have to make this a more robust function. One of the beauties of Dba Tools is that I wrote the function that I needed, and then other people have added to it, so we've got a better function for us all to use. One of the other things I love about PowerShell is it really wants to show you how to use the commands. So you can use get command to find what you need, and once you know what command you're going to use, you can use get help to see how you can use it. If you press get help test Dba DB compression, you can see that the output has been returned to my console, including short descriptions, syntaxes, descriptions. If I add the show window parameter, it pops up a separate window with the help inside that you can search for keywords. And you can see I have the database parameter. You can also keep this window up while you're working on your function or on your command to make sure you can refer back to it if you need to. So just a quick introduction to splatting. The reason I'm showing you this is during my demo, I'm going to use splatting to make the code fit on the screen more easily. This command, get Dba DB compression, is just checking my local SQL instance, the AdventureWorks 2017 database, and bringing back the first 5 objects that are compressed. This one isn't too long, but if I add too many more parameters, it starts to scroll off the screen and it's hard to read. So splatting is just a method of passing the parameters into the command as a unit. We are going to put the parameters within this hash table with parameter name equals value, and then we'll pass it into the function using the @ symbol for the variable. So this does the exact same, this runs the exact same command as I ran on line 49, except it's easier to read on our screens. And that's the format of code that you'll see during my demos today. So that is how to get started with Dba Tools. We have our module loaded. We're ready for our first life hack. So for life hack number 1, I'm going to show you how to test your backups with Dba Tools. First of all, we'll review our backup history. We'll then take some backups of our databases and test those backups. And I'll show you how to save the results into a table. So first off, as you can see, I have my SQL instance listed within this splat. I'm going to pass it to get dba backup history. And I'm going to check what backups we have run on my system. So as you can see, I have an AdventureWorks 2017 database on my MS SQL 1 instance, and I've taken a full backup, a differential backup, and a log backup. If there was more backup history, you could limit how much you returned from this command, but I have only taken these 3 backups on my system. There's also a database admin database on that instance, so I can back it up using backup dba database, specifying the instance and database name. And this will run a full backup of my database admin database. See, that has been returned here, full backup, start, end, and duration. So now both databases on my instance that have at least one full backup, I can test these backups using test dba last backup. I'm passing in the SQL instance where the databases live, the 2 databases I want to test, and then a destination server. This is going to offload that testing to a second server. I probably don't want to test my backups on production. I have the verbose switch set to true because I'm kind of nosy and I like to know what's going on. And then I'm using out variable to save the results to the results variable. So I'm going to kick this off, and you'll start to see output on my screen. The first thing it does is do get db backup history, which is what we already did to see what backups are available. Once it's found the backups, it checks the LSN chain to make sure those backups will fit together and can be tested before it starts restoring them to my MS SQL 2 instance. You can see here that it's restored the full backup of AdventureWorks, the differential, and the log backup. And now it is starting to run a DBCC check. So first of all, it restores those databases. It does an integrity check against those databases and then drops them from the second server. It then outputted the results. The extra output you're seeing now is because I have the verbose switch turned on. If you didn't have that turned on, you would only see the output. It's now doing the exact same thing for the database admin. And you can see that the results you get, where the database came from, where it was tested, the database name, how big that file was, whether the restore result was successful, whether the integrity check was successful, and how long those 2 operations took. It also lists the backup files that we used, so you can see what point in time you were able to get to. Well, this information is pretty valuable, right? If we could keep track of this, we would know when our backups were successful and when they weren't. So I'm going to show you this write dba data table parameter, function from Dba Tools. What that does is any object you have in PowerShell, if you pipe it to write dba data table and give it a destination, it'll output that object into a SQL table. So since I have saved my results into this results variable, I'm going to pipe those into write dba data table. I'm giving it the SQL instance. I'm telling it to put it inside the database admin database and to create a table named test restore. So this auto create table, if the test restore table doesn't exist, which it currently doesn't, it will create the table and it will estimate the data types that it thinks are appropriate for this data. If you're going to keep this table around, I recommend that you design it a little more effectively than that. But this will create a table. And if I open Azure Data Studio and show you my MS SQL 1 database, make that a little bigger. connect this to MS SQL 1. And I run this, select from test restore. You can see I have 2 rows in my table showing the same information that was on my screen previously, the source server, the test server, my restore results, and how long it took for both the restore and the DBCC checks. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, you can also use piping. So I can do test DBA last backup with those parameters from before, and then write DBA data table. And this is going to do exactly the same as before, right? I'm testing those backups on my second server and then immediately writing the results to write DBA data table. So with just a couple lines of code, and really it could be 1 line if you wanted one really long line, you can test your backups on a second server and save the results to a table for analysis later. So if you start to do this every day or every week for certain databases, you'll build up a history of how long it takes to restore your databases. You'll have a history of whether you were able to restore them successfully, so you'll start to pick up if there are any issues with your backups. We all know as database admins that there's really no point having backups if we can't restore them, so this is a really great way to test and make sure that we're able to restore those backups if we need. You can see now I've got 4 lines in my database, some from when we did them at 1037, 1038, and some from when we did them at 1040 and 1041. That is how to test your backups with DBA tools. Next up is my second life hack, which is database migrations. So this is really what DBA Tools was built for. You'll remember I mentioned that Chrissy built it to migrate SharePoint instances. I'm going to show you the available copy commands that we have, which is what we can copy from instance to instance. I'll then show you the databases and logins we have available, and we'll migrate those databases and logins to a new instance. Finally, we'll upgrade those databases as I'm going from SQL Server 2017 to SQL Server 2019. I also have a blog post link in this demo. This is all written out step by step on the DBA Tools website also. So first up, get command. I can pass in module DBA Tools, which is what we were doing before, and I can specify the verb of copy. You can see these are all of the copy commands that we have available in DBA Tools. All of these things can be moved from one instance to another by just specifying a few parameters. Let's go ahead and take a look at our databases with get DBA database. I'm going to grab the name, status, recovery model, owner, and compatibility. There are more properties available, but I just wanted to take a look at these. We already know we have the AdventureWorks 2017 database and my database admin database. These are both existing on MS SQL 1. I've again used the out variable parameter of this to save those to DBs to the variable. We'll be able to use that later to move them. Let's take a look at the logins we have available. I can use get DBA login for that. And you can see I've got some built-in logins. I have this Jess P login, which is what we're going to migrate. And there are some Windows groups also. I can then use get DBA process to see whether my application is still up and see if there are any connections to the databases I want to migrate. You can see someone is logged in as SA and is running the DBA Tools PowerShell module, and someone else has an Azure Data Studio query up. I can use get DBA process and pipe that straight to stop DBA process to kill all of the processes on those databases. Once I've made sure that my application is safely down, I can kill off any processes that are left out before we migrate our databases. So now we're ready to move our databases. So copy DBA database is what we're going to use for that. I've specified the source SQL Server, the destination SQL Server, and my databases. You'll remember I saved them to this DBS variable earlier, so I'm just using the name parameter of that. I'm using the backup restore method. DBA Tools also supports log shipping if your databases are larger and you need to reduce the downtime. I'm giving it a shared path that both instances have access to. And I've again turned on the verbose switch. You can use this set source offline so that as soon as the databases are moved, they're set offline on your previous instance. For now, I'm going to leave that commented out. So I'll kick this off, and you can see the first step is the backup of AdventureWorks from my MS SQL 1 database. It is striping it into multiple files for efficiency. And now it has already started restoring that to my second MS SQL 2 instance. Once this happens, it'll start on the second database, which is the database admin database, backs that up, and then restores that also to MS SQL 2. So at this point, my databases have moved over. I need to also migrate my logins. So I'm going to specify the login Jess P, the source and destination databases, source and destination SQL instances. And then I'm going to use copy DBA login to move those across. As you can see in the output, it basically scripts out my login and then executes it on the second server. You can see that was successful. So now I can use set DBA DB state for setting my two databases on MS SQL 1 offline. I'm setting it offline and I'm setting the false as true because I want to make sure those are set offline. And you can see in the results, the status for both of these is now offline. Okay, now I'm going to check on my compatibility level. I moved those databases from a 2017 instance to a 2019 instance. So I can use get DBA DB compatibility to check how they look now. You can see that those two databases are in version 140, which is not the same version as the system databases on that instance. I'm going to add two properties to my compat splat hash table. That is the database admin and target compatibility to 15. I can then use set DBA DB compatibility to upgrade the database admin database to version 150. As I mentioned earlier, one of the powers of Dba Tools is to be able to use scripts that other people have written. A lot of people have also written scripts around blog posts that have been put out into the community. So for example, Tom LaRock has written this upgrading to SQL Server 2014, a dozen things to check blog post. And in that, he talks about things you should do when you migrate your database to make sure it's ready to go. I'm going to kick off this invoke DBA DB upgrade against the database admin database. And basically what that does is it updates the compatibility level, but it also runs some additional checks. It runs check DB with data purity, it updates the usage, it updates the stats, and it refreshes any user views that you have. So you can see the results have come back on that. It has successfully completed all of those tasks, and that database is now upgraded and ready to reconnect our application to. So that is how to move your application databases from one instance to another pretty easily with Dba Tools. My final life hack, and I save the best till last, because who doesn't love documentation? So this is how you can easily export documentation for your entire SQL Server estate. This is a great use case for DR scenarios. If your data center went down and you needed to rebuild your SQL instances, you could use these scripts and your backup files to restore your databases and make sure everything is configured as expected. It's also a great way to monitor your environment for changes. One example is to run this script every day into a source controlled folder and then check any changes. You can see whether configuration changes have been made, new databases have appeared, login properties have changed, etc. So for this, I'm going to run export Dba Instance, and I'm going to pass it my two instances. I'm going to document both MS SQL 1 and MS SQL 2 to the export path. I am excluding replication settings because I don't have that set up right now, and it takes a while for it to run through. Now that I've run that, you can see that things are starting to appear at the bottom. First off, it's exported the SP configure, so let's take a look at that. This is the SP configure file for my MS SQL 1 instance. You can see that advanced options is turned on, so you've basically got a dump of everything you can do with SP configure. You can check all kinds of settings and make sure they're as expected, but you can also then use this to run against a new instance to make sure it's set up the same way. We've also exported built-in server roles, but if I had defined any myself, these would be included. Any database mail settings I have, and the restore scripts to restore my database backups. Now, I will state this again, you need to also have your database backup files. You can't restore your environment without those backups. So although this is the script out of how to restore them, you still need those backup files. We've also scripted out our logins. If I come down here, you can see that this includes the SID or the password hash for my SQL logins. So this means I can put the Jess P login on my server exactly as it is with the same SID and the same password hash. This file needs to be secured and looked after since it includes those passwords. There is a parameter on export Dba instance to not script out the passwords, so make sure you read the help on that and that you understand what you're scripting out. We've also got any extended event sessions that you've set up on your instance have been scripted out and can be recreated, and any SQL agent settings, schedules, jobs, etc. All right, one more thing I'm going to show you that I can do in Visual Studio Code. If I open the SP configure from my MS SQL 2 instance, which is my 2019, I can then compare it using the command palette, compare active files with my MS SQL 2 instance, and I can easily see whether I missed anything during my upgrade. You can see here that on my MS SQL 1 instance, my 2017 instance, I had CLR enabled, and now in my 2019 instance, I do not have it enabled. So that could be causing application problems if that was a requirement. We can also scroll down and see that Visual Studio Code has highlighted some other differences. Most of these are new settings because it's a 2019 instance. So that is how you can easily document your environment with Dba Tools, and how you can compare your files after an upgrade to make sure you are still matching and meeting your application best practices. All right, so those were my 3 life hacks for Dba Tools. We tested our backups, we migrated databases and logins, and then we documented our environments. Hopefully those are things that you can take back to your shops and implement to make your life easier with Dba Tools. Finally, I have some resources available that I've collected to help you get started with Dba Tools and to read up more. There's a couple of articles from the Dba Tools blog, including how to get the Dba Tools in a Month of Lunches book. And there is a great blog post, dbatools.io/secure, that shows all of the ways that Dba Tools is enterprise ready and secure and safe to use. There's a couple of links for docs. The dbatools.io/build link is a really great build reference for all of the different versions of SQL Server, including CUs, service packs, security patches. Finally, at the bottom, there are some ways where you can get involved with Dba Tools. Dba Tools is on GitHub. The team hang out on Slack all the time. If you need to ask questions or want to contribute, that's the place to talk to people. And finally, the Dba Tools at PS Tools on Twitter. If you have any questions or you've enjoyed the session, my contact details are on the slide, my email address or Twitter handle. I've also listed my GitHub repo for these demos. All of the slides and demos that I ran through today are available on GitHub. Hopefully that's been helpful, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks.